Local government, is it supportive of small businesses and landlords or not? Bill McGoughey will fill us in on this subject. This is Bob Odden for Libertarian Viewpoint. Libertarianism is all about liberty, the exercise of freedom that doesn't impinge upon the rights of others. We constantly hear the drum roll of government solutions. This show's purpose is to allow you to see for yourself why non-government solutions are a better alternative. Today, our guest is Bill McGoughey, and thank you, Bill, for appearing on the show.
Well, thank you, Bob.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and I mean, you're a landlord and how you got into the business and all of that.
Well, the studio here is in White Bear Lake. I actually lived within a half mile of here about 30 years ago. I then moved to Minneapolis about 20 years ago. I rented an apartment, and then I noticed that the building across the street was for sale. It was a HUD house, so I bought it and fixed it up. And then a year later, I bought a 9-unit apartment building that was right next door to that. So I suddenly, late in life, got into the landlord business. And that was quite an eye-opener. It's just west of downtown in Minneapolis. It's on Glenwood Avenue and Knox. And I immediately ran into problems with the neighborhood association, with the police, with inspectors, things that I never knew anything about,
How about it? Some of the people that are viewing probably never lived in Minneapolis or St. Paul. Could you kind of describe what a neighborhood association is?
Well, there's the idea that neighborhoods are good, that these are local people who, your neighbor, you want public policy to begin on that base, on that level. And the idea is that people organize politically at the neighborhood level, and then it works up from there into, districts of a big city. Well, there are, I think, 70-some neighborhoods in Minneapolis, but up into city politics, county politics, and on to the state level and federal. The problem is it doesn't really work that way. They're not, in my experience, neighbors actually getting together and deciding to do something collectively. They're funded by, first of all, they had something called NRP. It was related to tax increment districts, the money going into a fund that would be used for projects that the neighborhood people wanted. They would choose what they wanted.
Yeah, and then tax incremental financing, which you're referring to, that was, they're basically taking money out of the downtown district, and you're looking at the value of, I guess, the property when they initially taxed it or whatever, and then the present value, and then they're looking at the future taxes they'll get from that, and then they were spending that in the neighborhoods when, in reality, the money is really supposed to be spent on improvements in the city, and not to give to the neighborhoods.
Yeah, it was an experiment, I think, that the legislature authorized in the early 90s. It's kind of wearing down now. I think the city has abolished it. But the point is that it's not really funded by dues or by the people in the neighborhood. It's external money. And they turn into organizations of staff people getting jobs with the funding coming from NRP, from foundations, and so forth. I ran into opposition from the neighborhood group early on. I think some people wanted that property, and I got it. But basically, they didn't like the tenants that I had. There's a racial component here, too, that, it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, and I agree with that, but the neighbors don't like certain types of people. They can't go after the tenants, that's politically unsaleable, so they go after the owner of the building if you rent to people that the neighbors don't like. So there's the concept of the problem property. In other words, if there's crime in a neighborhood, they don't think in terms of the individual criminal so much, and you'd think that would be the logical target. There are people who are causing problems, so you might call them problem people or something. No, the paradigm in Minneapolis and St. Paul is there's a problem property. It's the apartment building where they hang out, or the convenience store, or they don't even have to live there. And it's easy to see why people, it's very visible if there are crowds of people near a building. But the owner of the building can't do a whole lot about it sometimes if they're on the public sidewalk. It's really a policing problem, and the city has found that it's easier to shift the blame to property owners and claim that they're magnets for crime. And, and therefore the way that you deal with crime is you punish the building. You use the resources of city government to make life unbearable for the person who owns or manages the property. And in many cases, then they close the building down and the crime goes away. Then the neighborhood celebrates a victory over crime. Well, lost in this process is the responsibility of the local police in dealing with crime. You'd think to some extent there'd be advantages of having people congregate in an area because the criminals would all be there, so they could keep an eye on it. But that's not how the system works. It's a blame-shifting mechanism that's gone on for some time by the politically powerful, that is the city, against isolated property owners.
You feel, I was wondering, so sometimes I got the feeling that the reason why they didn't go after behaviors and went after a property instead was because the bad behaviors were coming from voters that supported the people in office.
Well, I think that's true, although, the so-called underclass, I don't think votes. They're people without much purpose in life and so forth. And the solution is really establishing programs or speaking to people like this in their own terms and giving them a positive way out. We instead have the prison system, criminal justice system, and then its component, the inspections department, going after problem properties and trying to cleanse neighborhoods of this element by getting rid of the properties associated with them. What my particular specialty is that I had my building condemned, my apartment building, in 1995, and I quickly hooked up with a group of landlords who were suing the city of Minneapolis. Eventually we became known as Minneapolis Property Rights Action Committee, and we were really quite active in the period of 1997 through 2000 or 2001. We actually were a component in changing Minneapolis city government, and we supported Ryback at that point, and a lot of people who were elected in 2001.
Because I remember, you got rid of Jackie Cherry Holmes by 50 votes or something. It was really small.
Yeah, she was my council member.